Ladies and gentlemen, please buckle up. We're making our final approach. Colonel Oakland clicked off the intercom at just before 9 o'clock in the morning, Colorado time. The refueling stop at Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington had taken longer than expected, but the FBI commandeered Gulfstream 4 was finally arriving at its destination, Peterson Air Force Base, still flanked by two F-16s at the direct order of the president. Bennett was just beginning to awaken. He checked his seatbelt and found it still fastened snugly at his waist. He discreetly glanced over at Black, who seemed to be typing up a report of some kind on his laptop. A report, no doubt, on his state-sponsored torture near execution of a personal friend of the president, and at Maria Perez, the attractive flight attendant he wouldn't mind seeing again. As he slowly emerged from his drug-induced hypnotic state, throughout the night, Bennett had talked at length with Black about the way he had been treated and why, but oddly enough, even after a few more hours of sleep, he couldn't seem to muster the anger he wanted to feel. In his head, he wanted to crucify Black. The concept of an American citizen being subject not just to a fake lethal injection, but also to a fake gunshot to the back of the head at the hands of his own government sickened him. But in his gut, though he cursed the means, Bennett understood the motive and couldn't find it within himself to condemn the man or his team. It might have been easier to turn his resentment into rage if the man with the scar and the yo-yo were on board, but he wasn't. That guy was a thug, a scrap of human debris hired to do the dirty work. But Black was different. Bennett couldn't help but like him. There was something intriguing about this guy, something real and genuine and reassuring. For one thing, Black was a guy's guy. He carried a badge and a gun and stole planes from the State Department. For one thing, Black had a mission, a purpose in life. He traveled the world hunting down scum and eliminating them from the face of the earth. Good work if you could get it, and a world away from what Bennett did for a living. Sure, he would buy and sell this guy. Black probably made somewhere around $65,000, maybe $70,000 a year, 3 weeks of vacation, which he probably never took, and he was married. He could tell that by the ring on Black's left hand. But how often could he be home to enjoy married life? Bennett, on the other hand, made nearly $1 million a year, $975,000 and change to be more precise, plus another $2 to $3 million a year in stock options and profit sharing and other assorted benefits, depending on the ups and downs of the market. It was great work if you could get it, and he'd gotten it, and that was just the beginning. He also had a forest green Jaguar XJR he used for business and a little red turbo-powered Porsche used for dates and weekends in the country. He traveled all over the world. He schmoozed the most powerful CEOs and VCs in the business. He could pick up a phone and within a few minutes, never any longer than a few hours, get the President of the United States on the phone. He'd flown on Air Force One and slept over at Camp David. He dined at the Kremlin and toasted in Tiananmen Square. He'd once bought a gorgeous 2-carat diamond engagement ring on a business trip to Johannesburg, South Africa, for Someday. He just hadn't met Mrs. Someday, not yet. He was smart and respected and rich, but he was also hot-tempered and lonely and a workaholic. He had a huge office with an incredible view overlooking the wealthiest section of the wealthiest city in the most powerful country on the face of the planet in the history of mankind, but it was a restless existence. Life on the bullet train was about trade-offs, about little deals he made with himself to get ahead. He had only so much emotional capital to invest, and he'd chosen long ago not to diversify. He'd invested everything he had in his career, and his professional account was paying off in spades. The problem was, he seemed to have real trouble maintaining a minimum daily balance in other accounts, personal, emotional, and spiritual. He didn't really have any close guy friends, guys he could call up and hang out with and really talk with outside of work, away from the office, away from the deals. He couldn't seem to keep a steady girlfriend, much less a fiancée or wife, a soulmate who knew him deeply and loved him unconditionally and wanted him to know her and love her the same way. So what was the point if he didn't have anyone to share his success with? Maybe he who dies with the most toys doesn't win, thought Bennett. Maybe he's just dead. Bennett stared out the window at the F-16 on his wing and the light of the Air Force Base quickly approaching. It suddenly hit Bennett how rapidly and radically life could change. 24 hours ago, he'd woken up with visions of becoming a billionaire. Now he was just grateful to be alive. 24 hours ago, A new world had seemed possible, a world where Arabs and Israelis jointly drilled for oil, a world where two nations could become wealthy beyond belief, a world of prosperity leading to peace, of hope transcending hate, of freedom conquering fear, and now it was all gone. The ugly, evil face of terrorism was back. Men and women lay dead and dying. Today, the world was teetering on the edge of war and recession, and tomorrow could be worse. Jackie Sanchez was now the Secret Service agent in charge. The entire presidential security detail reported to her now that John Moore was in the intensive care unit, fighting for his life. After helping get Gambit to safety inside Crystal Palace, Moore had collapsed walking down a hallway and begun coughing up blood. He'd been hurried back to base hospital at Peterson and rushed into emergency surgery. But at this point, the prognosis looked grim. "You're absolutely sure?" pressed Sanchez over a secure landline. It was a few minutes after noon as she stood inside a small top-secret conference room down the hall from the massive NORAD Operations Center, made famous, if not quite precisely represented, by War Games, the hit movie in the 80s about a couple of young computer hackers who accidentally bring the world to the brink of nuclear war. Two Secret Service agents, one with a bomb-sniffing K9 unit, another from the technical division checking for eavesdropping bugs, finished sweeping the room. 100%, replied her boss, Bud Norris. "Okay," said Sanchez. "It just makes me nervous given what's happened." "I know, but believe me, I just read the report. Black emailed in from the plane. And? He'll send it to you in a few moments, but believe me, it's convincing. They really worked him over, huh? Brutally. And Black's guys were good? Oscar winning." Another female agent popped her head in the conference room door and gave Sanchez the thumbs up. "All right, boss, I'll take your word for it. Hey, about this memorial service the president wants for Saturday, what's happening with that?" "Don't worry about it. I've put together a team to get it done. It'll be Saturday at 2 o'clock at the National Cathedral. The guys over at White House Public Liaison are putting all the details together. We're mapping out the security and making sure the families all get here safely and are taken care of." "Great, let me know. Hey, look, I've got company." "Fair enough, but Sanchez?" "Yes, sir. When Bennett gets there, take good care of him. If he can survive the CIA and FBI, we don't want to lose him on our watch." "You got it, sir." "Take care, Sanchez." "I will, sir. Thanks." Sanchez hung up the phone and closed her eyes for a moment to catch her breath and gather her thoughts. Suddenly, the phone rang again. "Sanchez, absolutely, send them in." 10 minutes later, the conference table was set for Thanksgiving. Freshly squeezed orange juice with thick bits of pulp were poured into crystal glasses. Freshly brewed Colombian coffee was poured into white Syracuse china cups. And on a side counter sat a bucket of ice, a selection of sodas, and a row of NORAD embossed glasses. 2 metal carts were wheeled in from the NORAD commander's personal kitchen with heated platters of steaming slices of gold-roasted turkey and honey-baked ham, buttery mounds of mashed potatoes, bowls of stuffing, tangy cranberry sauce, piping hot sweet potatoes, boats of thick gravy, little plates of carrots and celery, and sweet pickles and olives. A cloth napkin covered baskets filled with cornbread and warm potato rolls, all lightly buttered and smelling like heaven. Bob Corsetti was the first to enter, followed by Secretary Iverson. 2 Secret Service agents were already in place in the back corners of the room. Corsetti and Iverson wasted no time in serving themselves. Then welcomed Dietrich Black, freshly showered, shaved, and now wearing a business suit, his own Beretta having been left with security back at the Air Force Base. "Deke, Bob, Corsetti?" said the White House Chief of Staff vigorously, shaking Black's hand. "Hey, Bob, good to see you again. It's been a while. Wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Oh, well, hey, how could I forget?" "Sorry, it's always on such difficult occasions." Black nodded. "I don't think you know Stu Iverson, the new Treasury Secretary," offered Corsetti. "No, good to meet you, sir." "Pleasure's mine," said Iverson, reaching for Black's outstretched hand, shaking it vigorously. "How was your flight?" "Uneventful." "We should all be so lucky," said Corsetti. "You must be starved. Please, have some dinner." "It hardly seems right, sir." "I know, but we have a lot to be thankful for. The president's alive, and you guys did quite a job with Bennett. Now eat." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Black reluctantly but gratefully helped himself and grabbed a NORAD coffee mug, some ice, and a Diet Coke, of course. and joined the two men at the table, silently bowing his head to say grace. Stu, what do you expect at the bell on Monday? Corsetti asked. Hellfire and brimstone, Iverson said bluntly, stirring some heavy cream into his coffee. Asia and Europe both crashed overnight. S&P futures are down sharply. Nasdaq's been acting like a whipped dog. Meltdown? The China syndrome. Iverson cut his turkey with his knife and fork, took a bite, then carefully wiped his mouth with his freshly ironed white cloth napkin. Bob, we need some good news, and we need it fast. And what happens if we don't get it? Iverson pondered that a moment, then set his knife and fork down. Look, it was a rough time after the Twin Towers went down. The market struggled for quite some time, but they eventually got back on their feet. People finally got their confidence back. They started flying again. They began to take vacations again. Companies began to hire again. Okay, now they wake up after all these new attacks, fearful more is on the way, and you've got a serious confidence problem on your hands. Companies around the world lost trillions of dollars of market value yesterday. Trillions in one day. And it's going to get worse. People aren't going to spend again. And you've got huge layoffs coming again. And what, Bob? That's it. Econ 101. Nobody buys, nobody produces, people get laid off. They spend less, they produce less. It's a vicious cycle and it's tough to get out. Worst case scenario? Look, Bob, I don't want to. Recession? Iverson shook his head. Bob, a recession is the least of your troubles right now. Spell it out for me, Stu. Iverson set his coffee down and took a deep breath. Look, the only thing that matters right now is what the president does this weekend. That's it, period. You mess this up and you've got a global economic meltdown on your hands. And I've got to tell you, Bob, arresting somebody isn't going to help. You can arrest 1,000 terrorists, 1 million, and no one's going to care. Not one. Even if they're all guilty. Especially if they're all guilty. People don't want arrests. They don't want to hear about frozen assets and economic sanctions and funding the Iraq National Congress and pinpricks and surgical strikes and all of that. You're saying we screwed up? Corsetti was getting a little defensive. Apparently, we did the best we could. This hasn't exactly been easy. I know, said Iverson. I'm just saying it wasn't enough, Bob. It just wasn't. You think we should have gone harder after Iraq, taken out Saddam? Somehow? Regime? Change? Isn't that what CIA recommended? You think we backed off from a full court press against Saddam because we were scoring big against other terrorists smaller groups? It was a good show, and we certainly vacuumed up a lot of bad guys, but not enough? Obviously not, Bob. This isn't a criminal investigation, it's a war. What's that supposed to mean? It means fight like it's a war, not an episode of Cops. Well, aren't you, Mr. Soundbite? Corsetti sniffed. What about all those Delta Force raids, the SAS raids, all that video of our forces wiping out terrorists, training camps, 43 of them to be exact? What about it? Corsetti's voice dripped with cynicism. Well, that's easy for you to say, Stu. Sorry your portfolio might take a beating this year. Bob, this isn't about me, and you know it. If all that Rambo stuff had worked, you and I wouldn't be sitting in a missile-proof mountain eating Thanksgiving dinner from a cafeteria. You'd better wake up and smell the Starbucks, son. People aren't going to sit back and let the President and the Queen of England get attacked and have the White House tell everybody, hey, we're handling it. They want someone to pay. Big time. And if they don't get the vengeance they're looking for, it's not vengeance, it's, yeah, whatever. If people don't get the Hollywood ending they're looking for, Bob, look, you asked me what the markets were going to do. I'm just saying that's what markets are for. They're one giant fortune cookie. They're a giant daily tracking pool. They tell us what people think about the future of the world. And are they waking up filled with fear or faith? Do you think things are going to get better or worse? They're tea leaves, Bob. They're oracles. And they're sending a pretty powerful message to the president right now. Whether you guys want to listen or not. Action. Big action or a big meltdown. Come Monday. Corsetti said nothing. He wasn't a CEO, a businessman, an economic strategist like Macpherson. He wasn't a Wall Street wizard, an investment strategist like Bennett. He wasn't an ambassador or diplomat, a global affairs strategist like Iverson. He was a political operative, a savvy tactician, more than a big-picture guy. He took polls and counted votes. He greased squeaky wheels before they made too much noise and put out brush fires before they became raging forest fires. He didn't think in 10 or 20 or 50 years increments of history. He thought in terms of 24-hour news cycles and 2-year election cycles. Iverson respected him for it, but it also made him nervous, for this was no longer about red states and blue states on some electoral college map. Bob, someone's going to pay the piper, Iverson concluded. It's either going to be the good guys or the bad guys, and it's your call. You guys had better make it right, or a lot of innocent people are going to suffer. Corsetti just stared at the turkey sitting uneaten on his plate and growing cold. Black kept his head down and quietly played with the mashed potatoes on his plate with his fork. The phone rang, and Corsetti answered it. A moment later, he had excused himself to go meet with the president. Iverson and Black were left alone to eat. FBI Director Scott Harris wasn't alone. He was sitting at a small conference table in his office having lunch with a couple of deputies when the phone rang. He'd just taken a huge bite of a Jersey Mike sub, number 9, the Club Supreme with roast beef, turkey, Swiss cheese, lettuce, tomato, mayo, and bacon, brought in fresh by a field agent who'd just flown down from Trenton for a meeting. But Harris answered anyway. On the second ring, Harris, he mumbled, trying to chew at the same time. Scott? That you? It's the president. Harris' eyes went wide. His deputies watched him freeze for a moment, his eyes darting every which way. Scott, you there? The president asked again. Harris had no place to go and no choice. He grabbed the trash basket by his desk and spit out an entire mouthful of the mouth-watering sub. Yes, Mr. President, what can I do for you, sir? And how are you, sir? Under the circumstances, I was pretty lucky. And you okay? Yes, sir. Fine, sir. Harris's deputies were now laughing openly as the director turned his back on them and looked out the window at Pennsylvania Avenue and the brightly lit Capitol building down the street. What have you got so far, Scott? Sir, we've got a full court press on. We've got some interesting leads, but nothing I can really give you yet. Soon. Hang in there. That's fine. I appreciate it. But look, here's my concern. How many people could possibly have known which limousine I'd be in? 63, not including your wife and daughters. We just nailed that number down, sir. You know where I'm going with this, then? I think so, sir. A mole in our ranks, perhaps even a sleeper agent. Is that possible? Honestly, sir, I wouldn't have thought so. But there's too much circumstantial evidence in terms of the precision of the attack against you. The problem is, there's not a lot of people I can talk to about this. If there is someone or several people inside the U.S. government working with terrorists on the outside, or with a terrorist state like Iraq or Iran or North Korea, or whomever, then it's going to be very tough to find them without letting them know we're hunting them down. That's precisely what worries me, Scott. So do whatever it takes, within the law, obviously, but pull out all the stops. Redo background checks, do surveillance, tap phones, intercept emails. I don't care. I want to know who's been leaking, and I want to know why. If you need an executive order from me, draft it, and I'll sign it. Just get your best people on it fast, and don't breathe a word to anyone on my team that you're doing it. You got it? Got it, sir. Scott, I'm counting on you. These people aren't sending me a message. They want me dead, and they're not going to take no for an answer. If they've got someone working with them on the inside, then I'm in a race for my life. We've got to hunt them down and take them out before they do the same to me. You got it, sir. Stuart Iverson thought back to election night 2 years back. It had been McPherson's first presidential campaign. He remembered the black and red digital countdown clock hanging over the reception desk, the one that read 000000. Election day, the 0 hour, had arrived. It was all over but the counting. The campaign headquarters had been located on the 5th and 6th floors of a huge renovated warehouse in downtown Denver, overlooking Coors Field. Table after table of phones and computers and fax machines and copiers on both floors were manned by dozens of paid staffers, volunteers, and interns. Phones rang constantly, and though everyone seemed to have at least one, if not two, phones to his or her ears, the ringing never seemed to stop. The amazing thing was that any of the senior staff on the 6th floor could get any work done with the sound of a Ricky Martin CD, belting out the World Cup theme song, rising from the bullpen of college interns on the 5th floor. The tattered coffee-stained carpet was littered with old newspapers, empty pizza and Chinese food boxes, and used pink phone message slips. Massive red, white, and blue banners covered the walls, along with scores of editorial cartoons and campaign fact sheets and internal phone lists. 5 televisions, each turned to a different network, hung overhead. Young kids, barely out of adolescence, scurried about in ripped jeans and college sweatshirts, each on some urgent task or another. The whole place was surreal, a cross between a big city TV newsroom and a college fraternity house on a Saturday morning. It wasn't pretty, but it was here that the campaign's get-out-of-the-vote operation had been in overdrive throughout the day. Iverson, the campaign's national chairman, had watched as Bob Corsetti, immaculately dressed in a charcoal gray pinstriped Italian suit with jet black hair slicked back like a Wall Street tycoon, moved quietly through the rows of 20-somethings manning the phone banks like a panther moving through jungle. As his right hand obsessively twirled an unlit cigar, Corsetti's eyes scanned every computer screen, every open notebook. His ears tuned in to every conversation while tracking all 5 networks above him. He said nothing, but you could actually see people stiffen as he walked by them, each suddenly perceptibly working a little harder, talking a little faster. Corsetti was the mastermind behind the McPherson miracle, and everyone in the room knew it. Back in the 90s, when Clinton was in office, it had been Corsetti, then the executive director of the Colorado State Republican Party, who quietly approached McPherson about running for governor. It was eventually Corsetti who, upon being hired as McPherson's campaign manager, persuaded this never-elected-before CEO to partially finance his own campaign and shake down his venture capitalist buddies to raise another $15 million. It was Corsetti who mapped out the game plan for McPherson to win not only the governor's residence but also a majority of the state legislature that year. It was Corsetti, now the newly elected governor's chief political strategist, who helped the novice push through an aggressive conservative agenda of tax cuts, welfare reform, and abolishing parole for repeat violent thugs. This set up McPherson to win a landslide re-election and positioned him beautifully to run for the GOP nomination and the presidency. Indeed, it was Corsetti, not McPherson, to whom everyone looked to make the math work, to put their man in the White House, to redeem all the 18-hour days they'd put in over the past 18 months, when they could have been making real money or going to the bars every night. The odd thing about a presidential campaign is that staffers often get more attached to the campaign manager than to the candidate. The candidate, after all, is an illusion, a fantasy, a projection of everything you hope for in the next leader of the country. But you never see him. He's never in the headquarters. You are never in a meeting with him. You never get to ask him questions or hang out with him or ride in the motorcade or travel on the bus with him. He's simply a face on a campaign poster, a name on a flyer, a position, a poll number, a soundbite on the evening news. The manager, on the other hand, is real. He's the one who hires you. He holds the staff meetings. He approves the requisition orders. He signs the checks. He chews you out one minute and decides your staffer of the week the next, rewarding you with a little jar of thermonuclear Southwestern salsa as a present. If you work harder, fight harder, stay longer, sacrifice more of your personal time for the sake of the campaign, odds are you're doing it for the manager, more for the manager than the candidate, because he's your leader. In a way, the candidate is just a slogan. Corsetti intuitively seemed to understand the psychology and rhythms and moods of a campaign. He knew when to strike and when to be silent. He knew when to let his money ride and when to cut his losses. He certainly preferred to be feared than liked, but to his own team, he was both. At 49, he was more of a father to these kids than a boss, and more of a grandfather than father. The New York Times had once described him as the Colorado Conciliatory. Newsweek dubbed him the Denver Don. The Democratic National Committee called him the Don Corleone in a Donald Trump suit. But no one said the campaign dared repeat such monikers, not in his presence at least. Bob Corsetti suffered no fools and brooked no foolishness. He was all business all the time, and his business was winning. Iverson remembered that as Corsetti had finished his final rounds for that election night, he had given no reminders to his team of California's importance. He didn't tell them the California polls were open for only one more hour. He didn't give anyone a pat on the back or rip anyone's head off. He simply walked through the room, surveyed the battlefield, and left the building without saying a word. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what they needed to do, and everyone knew the stakes, and no victory ever tasted sweeter than the one they got that night. if they had only known what lay ahead. At precisely 4 p.m., Bennett entered the conference room. Corsetti, now done with his meeting with the president, glanced up from a phone call and nodded, as did Iverson. Black stood up and greeted him, shaking his hand and asking him if he'd like something to eat. But they could all tell Bennett's mind was elsewhere. Agent Sanchez popped her head in again and pointed at Bennett. Sir, yes, the president would like to see you now. Bennett took a quick swig of orange juice from the place setting marked for him and wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin waiting on his empty plate. Hey, Stu, he said as he slid out past his old boss. Hey, John, Everson said, still numb from the whole experience. Bennett followed Sanchez and closed the door behind him. He was now standing in the dimly lit private study of the NORAD commander, its walls lined with bookshelves sagging from the weight of great tomes by Churchill, Clausewitz, Kissinger, Kearns, Goodwin. It was a long room, somewhat narrow and permeated with a sweet smell of pipe smoke that reminded him of visiting his grandfather's office as a little boy when his grandfather was a law professor at Georgetown University. At the far end of the room was a roaring fire in a stone fireplace. Where the smoke went in this mountain, he had no idea, and a beautiful working grandfather clock that had to be at least 100 years old, a huge wooden desk with a banker's lamp, and a big green leather chair. In it sat the President of the United States with 2 Secret Service agents standing nearby. Come in, John. Come have a seat, said McPherson, his voice soft but sincere. It was only as Bennett got closer that he realized how much worse the president's condition really was than had been reported in the press. Yes, the president had briefly addressed the nation last night, but he had done so by audio, not by video. Bennett learned from Black upon landing at Peterson. Yes, the president had given several interviews to AP and major newspapers for Thanksgiving morning editions, but they had been done by telephone, not in person, citing security concerns. Security, indeed. If the country could see what Bennett saw now, whatever the Dow was about to lose Monday morning would be 3 times as bad. Bennett couldn't believe how frail his friend and mentor looked. Already a trim man, it seemed like he'd lost 20 or 30 pounds in the past 24 hours. McPherson's face was bruised and scarred. His eyes were black and blue. His head was wrapped in bandages. His left arm was broken in a cast. His right arm was fractured and in a sling. He was on 2 IVs, and Bennett now noticed he was sitting in a wheelchair. Could both of his legs be broken as well? Bennett didn't have the heart to ask. His eyes started from the long scratches on the president's hands and face to the quiet confidence in his eyes. Mr. President, John, I'm okay. But I'm okay. I lived. Don't worry about me. I want to talk about you. Please, have a seat. Bennett quietly took a seat across the desk from the president. John, I want you to know, well, I'm sorry. Mr. President, please. John, I'm serious. I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am. I know that's not enough, but I really don't know how to. There's no need, Mr. President. No, John, there really is. You're a colleague. You're a friend. You've always been loyal and, well, you're practically family to Julie, the girls, and me. And I feel terrible about all this, but I do take full responsibility. Sir, it was my decision, and honestly, I'd do it over again if I had to. What was he supposed to say? Bennett had trouble even looking at the president, not really out of anger or resentment, but just out of sheer pain at seeing him in such terrible condition and knowing how close the man had come to dying in that attack. It was some kind of miracle that he had survived, and it seemed to make the trauma Bennett had just gone through somewhat more bearable. Julie and the girls baked you a pumpkin pie. The president nodded to the corner of his desk and the plastic-wrapped pie tin with the little note with his name on the envelope and a smiley face. Bennett nodded but said nothing. Deke and I spoke by telephone while you were sleeping on the plane. You know him? His brother and I flew jets in Vietnam. I didn't know that. Did you know he was tailing you in Israel? No. Did you know he had agents within 20 feet of you? Every step you took from the moment you got off the plane at Ben Gurion to the moment you re-entered the airport to come home? Bennett shook his head quietly. Did you know that I spoke to the Prime Minister of Israel before you left to go over there, requesting his personal assurance that no harm would come to you while you were in the country? Did you know that Barshkevsky works for us? Bennett shook his head again. Did Deke tell you that he and the CIA have been vetting Said and Kalashnikov for the past 6 months? Not exactly. Every phone call, every associate, every meeting, every letter, every email. Why? I think you know why. Bennett nodded. John, I've talked to every person involved in this operation, every single one of them, and this was not a side to McPherson Bennett had never seen. and he could see the president struggling to find the words. McPherson winced. Every single one of them. They tell me you never gave in, never broke on the oil deal, never gave up your friends. His eyes were now red and moist. Bennett's bottom lip began to quiver. Both were restrained and careful men. They were not given to displays of emotion in public or private, and the events of the past 24 hours or so had done nothing to change that. Well, I just wanted you to know. I just wanted to say thanks. Bennett glanced at Sanchez, who stared at him but showed no emotion. The other agents all stared at him as well. Was that suspicion in their eyes or sympathy or both? It didn't really matter, but he was curious. I don't know what to say, Mr. President. I'm just glad you're okay. Bennett was completely confused. His still fuzzy mind was swirling with emotions and thoughts and reactions he didn't begin to have the strength to identify, sort out, or understand. Not yet, so he said nothing. The room was silent, but for the crackling of the fire beside them, and the lolling tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner. I am okay. I'm okay. Thanks, said the president. Bennett suddenly snapped back to his old self. Good, because you look terrible. Startled, the president just stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. Bennett quickly joined him. You want a drink? I thought you'd never ask. Good man. Sanchez, get your men to wrestle up 2 glasses and some brandy or whiskey, something old, something expensive. Yes, sir, Mr. President. I'm not kidding, Sanchez. Call the commander. Ask him what he has stashed away in case he ever finds out the birds are flying and heading straight for him. Then tell him to get his butt down here and break it open for us. You got it, sir. I'll check with your doctors as well. Oh, Sanchez. Now don't go ruin it for us. Be a sport, would ya? Sanchez smiled and moved to the far end of the room, where she picked up a phone. The president turned back to Bennett. John, I've got a National Security Council conference call in a little while, and we may be interrupted by some phone calls, but I wanted to talk to you heart to heart for a little bit, and I've got a surprise for you. Please, no more surprises. No, this is a good one. The president picked up the phone. Hi, would you send in Kojak? No, right now. Well, I guess, all right, that's fine. Okay, thanks. He hung up the phone. Kojak? Bennett asked. It's a code name. You don't have Telly Savalas stashed away someplace, quipped Bennett. Very funny. Really, who is it? Your partner in crime. My what? Your partner. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, John. Can't do it alone. Sir, I don't know what you're talking about. The president just looked at him for a moment. John, why do you think I just put you through all of this? How should I know? I have no idea. Sure you do. I do? Of course. Bennett looked over at the flickering fire. It felt warm and peaceful and safe. Well, I guess you wanted to make sure I was loyal, honest, not some kind of security threat. What else? Sir, really, John, listen to me. Bennett turned back and looked the president in the eye. I need you on my team, John, not on Wall Street, not in Denver. I need you on my team. What are you saying, sir? I want you to work for me. Full time? Of course. At the White House? Where else? Sir, with all due respect, all due respect? John, you just told me how terrible I look. Bennett had a laugh. The man had almost been killed, but he still had a sense of humor. Yes, well, that's true, sir. But what? Bennett scrambled to put a coherent sentence together. In case you didn't notice, I've just negotiated $1 billion deal. Believe me, I've noticed. Well, the White House sounds fun. But, sir, I'm on track to become a billionaire over the next few years. A billionaire, sir? No, you're not. I'm not. I know those drugs and you haven't completely worn off yet, but I don't think you fully grasp what's going on here. You and I are at NORAD, John. I was just attacked by terrorists. Terrorists just bombed Buckingham Palace, bombed Paris, attacked the Canadian Prime Minister. They just flew a fully loaded 747 into the palace of the Saudi Arabian royal family. John, it's over. The world, the way you and I know it in 24 hours ago, is over. McPherson at heart was a mentor, always trying to help Bennett discover the bigger picture, the story behind the story. Unless, added the president, rattled by his own lack of instincts, Bennett took the bait. Unless what, sir? Unless, John, you and I rebuild it. Rebuild it? That's right. How, sir? We'll get to that, but first I need you to join the White House staff. Exactly? Bennett leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Where was that drink Sanchez was fetching? Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Sir, what would I do? I don't know anything about Washington, about politics, about terrorism. Bennett protested. I've spent my whole life thinking about investment strategy, not whatever. You're wrong. Beg your pardon? John, your expertise is deal-making, research, analysis, assessing, leading leaders in companies, industries, for opportunities and signs of trouble. You have a knack for reading the tea leaves and convincing people to buy the tea company. That's exactly what I need right now. Bennett just sat quietly. John, unless I act and act fast, the markets are going to tank. The world is going to slip into a recession, maybe a depression, but we're going to act. And when we do, we need a strategy for peace, not just for war. That's where you come in. What? Some kind of 21st century Marshall Plan, Mr. President? No. Come on, John, think. I guarantee you when the dust settles, we're going to find Saddam Hussein behind all of this. And if we have to go to war with Iraq, when we win, who benefits besides us? Well, sir, it depends. Come on, John, if you woke up a few months from now and Iraq was no longer a threat, just suppose who benefits? Israel, I guess. Exactly. Now think about it. If we do this right, your oil deal is going to happen. We can defang the biggest geopolitical threat in the Middle East, the epicenter of evil, and then help Israel and Palestine become two of the wealthiest countries in the history of mankind. We can wipe out terrorism and bring peace and prosperity to modern Middle East. We can do what people have been thinking about and dreaming about and praying about for 5,000 years, John. Next year in Jerusalem, peace in the Middle East, and your deal has to be the centerpiece. You think so? I've been thinking about this for months. For quite some time now, I've been meaning to talk with you about turning your oil deal into a historic peace deal. But it wasn't really until I woke up here at NORAD that I understood precisely what I really needed to do. So why don't I stay where I am? Because I need you where I am, John. Forget it. You're not going to be a billionaire. It's not going to happen. And the problem is, if you stay with GSX, then I can't use your deal as the centerpiece of my peace strategy. Why not? It's a conflict of interest, and you know it. What about Stu? Stu sold off everything to become Treasury Secretary. I made him do it. Of course, he could have made a fortune, but hey, he's already loaded. So is my right-hand man at Treasury. But on this deal, I want you working with me to oversee it day to day, to help me navigate this baby and pull it off. Sir, I just don't exactly see where you're going. I mean, John, look, it's all to be clear soon. But first I need an answer from you. Bennett leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling. Leave GSX and move to Washington? Senior advisor to the president. And join the White House staff? I know just the guy I'm going to kick out and give you his office. Bennett laughed. Bob? Now the president laughed. No, not that I wouldn't like to sometimes, but... Bennett pondered the whole thing. Yet again, his life was about to change radically. He didn't like it, but there was obviously nothing he could do about it either. Well, I guess I owe you for not having me killed off, right? The president smiled and slid a black leather folder with a gold presidential seal across the desk. That's the spirit, John. Now sign here. What am I signing? The top one is your resignation from GSX, effective immediately. The next one is your acceptance of my job offer, senior advisor to the president, $90 a year plus all the government benefits. Bob makes $140. Don't push it, Bennett. I didn't make Bob a millionaire at GSX. Oh, and he didn't have a cut of all of the ad buys during the campaign. The president smiled again. Okay, I did make him a millionaire, but not at GSX. Whatever. John, look. First of all, you can afford a pay cut. Second, the whole point is that you need to be incognito. If you make more than 100, you're going to pop up on everybody's radar screen. The press is going to be all over it, and that's something I just can't afford right now. You always were a good salesman. Son, you ain't seen nothing yet. Bennett began to look over the documents in the folder. So who's Kojak? He asked, pulling out his Mont Blanc pen to sign. Oh, that's right, Sanchez. The agent picked up a phone to find out what the delay was. It's Black, isn't it? Bennett asked. No, but I do want him on your team. I want you to set up a small team inside the White House that you can coordinate with me and the NSC. Publicly, you won't exist. Privately, while I run the war, you guys will run the point on turning this oil deal into a peace deal. You'll report directly to me and Marcia Kirkpatrick. Captain Kirk? You've got good sources, Bennett. I like your spunk. So why do you call this guy Kojak? I mean, you know I just figured it was Black because he's bald. Well, yeah, nice guess, but wrong. All right, well, what then? Kojak's been with CIA for 5 years, top security clearances, top assistant to the director, knows everybody, knows me, knows this oil deal, been working as a field agent the past 2 years, keeping an eye on you, as a matter of fact. Bennett was lost. Sure, better not be that sick, demented, deranged CIA guy in Israel, the one with the yo-yo, he thought. He'd rather retire and join Greenpeace than work with that lunatic. The door at the far end of the room opened, the same door Bennett had come through earlier. Bennett couldn't believe it. He felt like the wind had just been knocked out of him. Kojak wasn't he was a she. His new partner in crime was Aaron McCoy.